So this is the first in a series of videos I hope to make Newton's third law all the way up, the physics of good eventually triumphing over evil. So a famous Gandhi quote is, "When I despair, I remember that all throughout history, the way of truth and love have always won. There have been tyrants and murderers, and for a time they can seem invincible. But in the end, they always fall. Think of it, always." So what Gandhi said from a law angle, I hope to say from a physics angle, because physics is what I know. I can't help but think I'm copying Gandhi's homework a little bit, but I think he would understand if he were still alive. So this is a brief introduction to quantum mechanics. During my bachelor's and master's degree, I went pretty deep into the mathematics of quantum mechanics. That goes way further into the weeds, and I want to go in with this video. So I make a few simplifying assumptions and take a somewhat loose mystical interpretation in order to get to what I want to say. So a major principle of quantum mechanics is wave-particle duality. So reality behaves as both particles and waves at the same time. So if we look into the history of science very broadly, experiments that set out to prove that reality behaves like particles tend to prove just that, atoms bumping around according to mathematical and logical principles. And experiments that tend to prove that reality behaves like waves, like ripples on a pond, tend to prove just that. So it turns out reality behaves like both, depending on the observer. And because of this, you tend to find what you're looking for in reality. And humans can view reality through either a particle or a wave lens. So most humans view life through more of a particle lens when you're inside of your ego. So the ego is the individual self. It perceives itself in its reality as matter or particles. It analyzes the physical appearance of things, and survival tends to be its priority. It's the wild animal part of ourselves. It views itself as separate from its external reality. This allows for logic and dualism, as it thinks of itself as completely separate from its external reality. My ego likes to fancy itself as a wolf, but in reality, it behaves a lot more like Scooby-Doo. Ruh-roh. Now, the other side of perception is perceiving life as a wave. This is done by spirit. Now, this side tends to get left out of the scientific discussion often. I've heard it referred to as many things: spirit, soul, higher self, inner child. They all tend to point to the same basic reality. This side perceives itself and its reality as interconnected, all as one. It tends to see into the truth of things, our intuition. Appearances and opinions are not very important to it. Negativity is illusionary, as from its point of view, reality is already perfect. It's not rational or verbal, but it tends to know it's immortal. Near-death and out-of-body experiences tend to result in feeling this state of existence even more independent of the ego. So both these sides of life, the particle and the wave side of life, neither one is wrong, but neither one is completely right all by itself. So human existence tends to be challenging because we have this animal-angel conflict. This is most well captured by the fable of the two wolves. We got the two wolves kind of pulling on us, the particle and the wave side of life, or the ego and spirit. And the animal part of us tends to be represented by the lower three chakras, for those of you familiar with the chakra system. And the wave side of life tends to be represented by the upper three chakras. In the heart, the middle chakra tends to be the link between them. But in human existence, you're constantly pulled between those two phases of life, I'll say. So a famous scientist that clearly had a pretty good view of both sides was Albert Einstein. So when he encountered quantum mechanics, he famously came down on the particle side of things. He was a scientist. he wanted to study his external reality as an independent thing to understand life. I mean, that's what scientists do. So when he heard about the wave interpretation of things, he came up with a famous phrase, spooky action at a distance. You know, how one thing can affect another thing instantaneously on the other side of the universe. He didn't really love that idea. However, he was wise enough to know that there was more to life than just the particle side. If you read his quotes about him, he was very spiritual, and he did acknowledge that there was more to life than what science could explain. One quote he had, "The intuitive mind is a sacred gift. The rational mind is a faithful servant. We have created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift." So even though he was a scientist that viewed life through mainly a particle lens, he was clearly wise enough to know that the other side existed. So I hope that gave you a brief introduction to quantum mechanics. I love you all.